Episode 5. Bye. See you soon, Grandma. Immediately after Mr. Scott said that, the class went silent. The youngster sat down, took a book, and poked Kenneth's back. What a coincidence. She just happened to be assigned to our class. Kenneth leaned on the back of his chair with his hands crossed. He was born handsome, and when he frowned, his face looked a bit unhappy. Why, Paul, do you know the new classmate? Paul Adams' deskmate came over and asked with interest. At the beginning of the senior year, the teachers of each subject were strict with them, and not many interesting things were happening. Having heard this, a bunch of people in the back row came up to them. I just know that it's a girl, but don't get excited. Paul rested his hands on the table and grinned. He didn't mention that this new classmate was Anne's sister. Anne was a person who was drawn to their circle by Kenneth, and it was no secret that he liked her. Why? At the news that it was a girl, everyone grew excited. She is retaking a year in our school and is from Fairfield. Paul shook his head. You know, Fairfield is one of the 3 major poverty-ridden places in the area. Immediately, they visualized her in ragged and old clothes. They assumed that she would have hailed from a not-so-wealthy background. Darn you, Paul, why are you like this? You're not giving room for imagination. A teenager next to him spread his long legs out. Mr. Scott was about to say something, but he saw that Bessie was still not inside, so he tilted his head and said with a gentle expression, Bessie, come in. Bessie was still outside the classroom, holding a school jacket and a few books. She held the books with one hand and placed the jacket on top of the books. She held her phone in the other hand and was looking at it. It was the news of Daniel Brown. Bessie took one glance at it before casually shoving her phone back into her pocket. When she heard Mr. Scott's voice, she took the books, jacket, and walked into the classroom. Paul lowered his voice and said while spinning a pen, Kenneth, do you think she got scared? I searched and found out that Fairfield's education isn't good. She's really damn brave to come to Bright Bow High. Kenneth looked down at his phone and then he pulled his chair and got up. I'm going to the auditorium for Anne's violin lesson. Kenneth first saw Anne because of her violin performance at the opening ceremony. Anne had attracted him with her beautiful violin melody. He went out through the back door. He just happened to walk past Bessie. I'm so jealous of him, Paul said. He wasn't as bold as Kenneth and said gloomy. I also want to see Anne play the violin. What's there to know about a new student? He kicked his legs at his deskmate's table, hoping for validation. But his deskmate didn't speak, and the classroom fell into a weird silence. All the whispers disappeared instantly. They were all staring at the podium, the silence of the classroom marking their astonishment. I'm Bessie. Bessie shifted her position and held books with her other hand to write down her name on the blackboard with chalk. She was obviously very polite. She even had a sort of rebel attitude in her that was carefully hidden. But her careless and casual movements clearly and yet indistinctly brought her personality out. There was utter silence in the class. Mr. Scott pointed to a vacant seat and smiled. You can sit there. Mary Smith, introduce everyone to your new classmate and take her around campus after class. The girl with a ponytail regained her senses. She blushed, then stood up and let Bessie walk to her seat. Paul and a few boys in the back row had not anticipated this student, but they had probably already sketched out her image in their minds. But now, all these preconceptions of theirs had been overturned. After English class was quiet for 2 minutes, there was a loud gasp. The words on the blackboard were written in a single stroke. They were crooked and not straight. Although they were not good-looking, they were full of personality, just like her. She had luscious hair that fell over her shoulders, along with perfect skin and long legs. She seemed like a free-spirited girl with an icy cold demeanor. Everyone in the classroom was watching her. Her delicate eyebrows gathered a bit of evil between her eyes. The corners of her mouth were arched casually. She was definitely impressive. Her aura was strong, and wherever she went, all the boys retracted their feet that had been stretched to the middle of the aisle. Damn. This girl is terribly pretty. Paul, your intel was wrong. What a hot deal. Our next prom queen, maybe? Mary Smith wanted to talk to the new classmate and take her on a walk around campus, but she was already sitting on the table with one hand propped up, looking away. Mary seemed utterly frightened, but wanted to have a conversation with her. After one lesson, Bessie put her school jacket on and asked Mr. Scott for an accommodation form. She also asked for leave. 40 minutes later, inside the Smith family's house. "Why are you back so soon? School isn't finished yet, is it?" Aunt Ruth opened the door and frowned when she saw her. Her gaze was harsh and judgmental. Bessie raised her eyebrows, darting her bloodshot eyes towards her, and said concisely, "Out of my way." Aunt Ruth's heart tightened, and she stepped back instinctively. Bessie went straight upstairs. Aunt Ruth pursed her lips. If it weren't for Anne, would Mr. Smith have agreed to bring her to the family? Did she really think she was all that? Upstairs, Bessie found Grace's door. The door was half open, and the sounds inside could be heard. Bessie's footsteps paused. It was Grace's voice, aggrieved and irritable. "You're calling me biased, but what can I do? After a few days when the relatives of the Smith family come over, how am I supposed to explain things to them? What if they ask? Do you want me to tell them that Bessie dropped out of school because of bad behavior and has come to Chicago to repeat a year?" Grace said, almost resentful. "Say that she's still in her senior year even though she's 19 and is in the same year as Anne? How could I possibly say such a shameful thing? The aunts in the Smith family already don't like me. Do you think it's so easy being a wife of a rich man?" Grace admitted that she was biased towards Anne. Anne has always been a clever child. David had already said that they would not have a second child, so she had devoted her life to Anne. Anne didn't disappoint either. She was not only excellent, but had also won David's favor. Anne was her hope, so it was a natural thing for her to be biased. Outside the door, Bessie raised her foot and kicked the door open, fierce and annoyed. Grace and Grandma Bertha looked out the door. Bessie was standing right outside with a slip of paper in her hand. She leaned against the door hinge with a smile which seemed casual, but also very devious. Grace's doctor's appointment wasn't that early, but she lied because she didn't want to take Bessie to school. Anne was a pretty renowned figure in Bright Bow High, and Grace often attended parent meetings there. Many of them knew her as Anne's mother. She didn't really want others to find out that a bad student like Bessie was her daughter as well. She was resisting that fact. Grandma Bertha wasn't so dense and unaware of the situation. She had tried to talk to Grace about it. She knew that she didn't have much time left and Bessie was still very young. If she didn't care about Bessie now, no one else would. Grace saw Bessie and opened her mouth, but she could barely explain herself. "Bessie, Mom didn't mean it that way." It was all about Grace's reputation in the family. Taking into account Bessie's actions, it wasn't possible for her to not feel upset. She was simply venting out her suppressed emotions on Grandma Bertha. To their surprise, Bessie had overheard the conversation and her expression had not changed even a bit. With one hand in her pocket, she nonchalantly said, "Whatever." Grace looked at her stunned. Bertha sighed. "Bessie, Mom was just hot-headed." Grace found her voice but still gave herself away as she fiddled with a shawl over her shoulders. "It's good that you're back now. I got them to tidy up the bedroom, so you'll be staying on the 3rd floor from now on. I decorated your room based on Anne's as reference." "No need for that. I'm just here to tell you." Bessie narrowed her eyes and said slowly, "I'm living in the dorm." With that, she turned away and went to pack her things on the 3rd floor. There was nothing much, just a black bag, a laptop, and a cell phone. Bertha followed Bessie into the room. "It's not a bad idea to stay on campus." She paused before going. "You've to get along well with your friends. Don't lose your temper too easily, and most importantly, take care of yourself," said Bertha with teary eyes as she had never left Bessie on her own. She was precious to her because she had raised and nurtured her. She took a look at the guest room that Grace decorated not too long ago. The colors were warm and welcoming, the sort that Anne would like, but that Bessie was not quite into. She took her time to pack her bag before zipping it up finally. Grandma Bertha eyed her. "Bessie, why did you lie to your mom?" Bessie slung her bag on her arm and looked at Grandma Bertha, urging her to go on. "You were already very skilled at playing the violin when you were 9. Grandma Bertha put her hand to her forehead. "The renowned teacher had come over to live in Fairfield for 6 months, and she'd wanted to take you on as her student. Why didn't you tell your mom that?" "There's not much to tell her about," Bessie casually said as she rested her hand on Grandma Bertha's shoulder. "Don't worry too much. Auntie said Mom was very pretty when she was younger, and she was your favorite. Now that she's brought you over here to take care of you, you can just rest. I'll come to visit you once my vacation break begins." To be fair, Grace was very respectful and filial towards Grandma Bertha. The elderly liked having their children and grandchildren around them, and Bessie knew that was the same for her. They headed downstairs together. Grace was left stunned as she sat on the couch in the living room. She saw Bessie head down the stairs with her bag slung over her shoulder. She stood up, realizing that Bessie meant it when she said that she was moving into the dorm. Bessie didn't bring along anything she'd prepared for her, whether it be the whole wardrobe of pretty clothes or the branded backpack. Grace had no idea how to respond or what to say to the situation. How could anyone not like living in a big house, wearing brand clothes or carrying brand purses? "I'm going to school. I'm counting on you to take care of Grandma. I'll head to the hospital when I'm on vacation break." Bessie had one hand in her pocket, and her eyes looked cold and distant. The Smith household wasn't very far away from the school, and they had their very own nutritionist. Year 3 students had a rather hectic workload, and it was all the more stressful at Bright Bow High. Any family that could afford to have parents stay home to guide their children would do it, rather than have them stay on campus. Grace also knew it would be better for Bessie to live at home. But as she watched Bessie head towards the door, she remembered that a few relatives of the Smith family were coming over in a few days. Eventually, she decided not to ask Bessie to stay. Grace got the chauffeur to send Bessie to school. "Your older brother and younger sister are all... forget it. Just study hard." As she saw Bessie leave, the tension she'd been holding inside her dissipated all of a sudden. Grandma Bertha walked Bessie to the door, and when she offered to accompany her to school, Bessie declined and said, "Bye. See you soon, Grandma." Bertha stood at the main door. She knew that Bessie had her own quirks and likes that others found it hard to understand. But as she looked at the black bag on her shoulder, Grandma Bertha suddenly realized that Bessie never even brought her things to the Smith house in the first place. She'd been planning on living on campus the whole time. Will it be easy for Bessie to live on campus, away from her grandmother who loves her unconditionally?